Story 1. I've been fired twice in my life. First time, I was working part-time at a sawmill and put in my 2-week notice since the school year was ending and I had a summer job lined up. I was fired on the spot. Second time, I was T-boned while making a delivery for a General Motors dealership I was working at. The other driver was deemed at fault. They said it would raise their insurance costs and fired me. I didn't lose sleep over either firing. They were not careers I was wanting to pursue. Story 2. Because my boss told me something she wasn't supposed to and then got rid of me, presumably out of fear that I would report her. I got fired, but the joke's on her because I reported her as well. Nuclear option. Baby. Mutually assured destruction. Story 3. I communicated with a client, ensuring the lines of communication were always open because none of the higher-ups would respond to their questions. I had just had a performance review giving me perfect scores and commending me for maintaining such a positive relationship with this client. I had never been written up before, no performance improvement plans or corrective action plans in my 5 years there ever. 2 weeks after my perfect performance review, I was put in a performance improvement plan for communicating with the client. It was standard conversation, just the type of conversation we always had to make sure the project was performing as planned and that deadlines were going to be met. I guess my critical mistake was having a conversation with my boss to keep her in the loop that the client relationship was fine and we were good. My very first performance improvement plan was a final warning. I had a new job 3 days later, and my previous employer got mad at me because they lost the client and the account when I left, knowing the only person who ever communicated with them was gone. My new job included a $30,000 raise, so no complaints here, but I was upset at the time. It just felt extremely unfair. Story 4. Okay, so hear me out. This was technically my fault, but also kind of not. I used to work at this cute little boutique, and one day a customer came in being super rude, like yelling at me because we were out of some scarf she wanted. I stayed polite, but when she said, "I'm never shopping here again," I just replied, "Okay. Have a nice day." Apparently, that was too much sass, and my manager fired me for not diffusing the situation. Honestly, no regrets. Retail is wild, and I'm happier now working somewhere with less drama. Story 5. Told them I would be taking a day off to see my brother graduate from college in 2 weeks. They approved it then, but when that day rolled around, they took it back. Never left a job so quickly and with so little remorse. Forget those guys. Story 6. I took a job that wasn't a good fit for me because of the high pay. However, the long hours, long commute, and monotonous work quickly made me hate it. As a result, I didn't really care and was a poor performer, eventually getting let go. That was my money isn't everything lesson. I took a lower-paying job with a much shorter commute and better hours and was much happier. Plus, it had more growth opportunities. Story 7. I once got fired because I refused to work off the clock. There were some incoming auto parts that weren't put away by the prior day's team. My boss wanted me and a coworker to put those items away before we clocked in. I said that I would put them away, but only on company time. He said, "Nope, you're fired." I sued him for unemployment benefits and I won. Story 8. A nonprofit hired me to be a full-time grant writer. But it quickly became clear that they did not understand how the grant process worked. They thought I could just send a letter and say, "We need a new printer. Money, please." I tried to explain that grant funders were only really interested in funding projects that would have a measurable impact on the nonprofit's clients. But for every project I proposed, they said no, they did not have time or staff to spare. While this was going on, they fired their director of communications. That was my previous job title, and I had loads of experience. My resume matched everything they needed. But when I asked to transfer to that position, they said no with no explanation. Finally, they just ended the grant writer position. They ended up firing me right before Christmas. Nice folks, huh? Story 9. I prevented a patient from committing suicide. I was let go because I got physical with the patient. I grabbed his wrists to prevent him from pulling out his air tubes. The family of the patient would protest this action and even be the reference I needed to get a better job while they hounded my former employer with bad reviews and used their influence to literally end the temporary employer. Story 10. Company reorganized, and my new manager inherited me. She didn't want me, so she set outrageous and unattainable goals. Within 1 month, I was put on a performance improvement plan, and those goals were unattainable. She didn't want to listen to why the goals were simply impossible and what she wanted didn't fit into her current process. She wanted me gone. I worked tirelessly trying to meet them. Last I heard, they moved 2 people into the position to do my job, and the 2 people couldn't do it. Lesson learned. Being fired doesn't make you a failure. I am now working for an amazing manager and team. Story 11. I've only been fired once. I was in my 20s. I was working at a now-defunct bookstore chain. I was the only employee on for the entire day because they were trying to save money by only scheduling 2 at a time, and the manager had disappeared on me. It was busy. I was also trying to do inventory, which was supposed to be submitted in a few days. A mystery shopper came in and failed me because I didn't greet her within a certain number of minutes of her coming in and didn't offer to sell her a membership when she bought her $3 magazine, which it wasn't applicable towards. No mention of me literally running around trying to help people all by myself. Failing the mystery shop, it turns out, was a fireable offense. Story 12. I have been fired once in my life. I was just starting my career and was the direct assistant to someone who had been with the company for a very long time, Joe. The newly brought in higher-ups were planning on shaking up the business, basically making a bunch of changes to a long-standing successful business to make even more money. One of the things they wanted was to get rid of certain people who had high salaries. Joe had been with the company for a very long time. They were a dynamic individual and made a lot of money for the company, and they were paid in line with their role. The higher-ups knew that firing Joe would cost them a lot of money. Where I live, you have to have a serious cause to fire someone, and you have to pay them compensation, which increases with tenure. Since it would cost them a lot of money to fire Joe, they tried to make their employment unbearable and force them to quit. They started with little things, moving to a worse office, micromanagement, and so on. They also knew that Joe relied heavily on me as their assistant and that we had a great working relationship. So when everything else didn't work, they fired me. It was without cause, and they did have to give me a very small compensation package. But they knew it would upset Joe since they had repeatedly commended me to everyone about what a great job I did. The worst part was they literally fired me the day before Christmas. I was completely blindsided and so upset. I was young and barely scraping by, so I was so stressed out. In the end, it worked out great for me. Joe ended up getting me into a competing company with personal introductions and recommendations. Joe stayed in touch with me and kept encouraging me in my career. I continued to advance and attended university part-time to upgrade my skills, and I am now working in a senior position for a company I absolutely love. Eventually, the company that fired me completely collapsed, but not before going from one of the most highly regarded companies in our field to a laughingstock. All the cuts the higher-ups made came back to bite them. Joe left on his own terms about a year after I was fired. He ended up giving them the absolute bare minimum notice, and when he left, thanks to a carefully worded employment contract, took a lot of things that he created within the job with him because they were his property. The collapse of the business started shortly after Joe's departure. Story 13. Had a boring office job where I did not have enough work to do. So I would spend most of the day on Reddit or otherwise screwing around. Sounds fun, and it was nice for a little bit at the start, but it quickly becomes soul-crushing to be so bored every day, all the time. It led to me developing pretty serious depression, so I would start to do things like come in hours late, go to lunch, and not come back, just not even caring because I was so done with everything. Eventually, they had a meeting with me where they basically said I had no more chances, and if there were any more problems, I was going to be fired. You would think this would have finally convinced me to stop. But no. Later that very same week, my boss left the office an hour early on Friday afternoon. So my foolish self thought, well, if he is gone, I can skip out too. No one else is here to notice. So I left a few minutes after him. I come back on Monday only to find out that the boss had come back to the office a few minutes after he left because he forgot something. So he obviously saw I was gone, and that was it. Fired. I am not complaining or saying I did not deserve to be fired. I absolutely deserved it. They gave me so many chances, and I was just too messed up mentally to do the things I needed to do. Story 14. I refused to remove improperly applied tape from a recently declawed cat's feet, and instead chose to do it in a painless manner with spray that dissolved the adhesive, as I had been trained to do in another clinic. I chose not to inflict pain on a cat they had already caused irreparable damage to. Do not declaw your cats. I don't care if it's still legal where you live. It's cruel and inflicts lifelong pain. Story 15. After 2 years there, they didn't want to raise my pay above minimum wage and figured it would be easier to hire and train someone and pay them minimum wage for a pretty demanding role. Plot twist. They had to replace that role at least 3 to 4 more times within the following 6 to 7 months. I heard about it from a colleague. Story 16. I couldn't read the 0.5-point text that was so pixelated that even the screen magnifier they promised me for about 6 months and never delivered wouldn't help. Contract work for the Texas Attorney General. Forget him and forget that company. Story 17. I couldn't sleep. In emergency wards, seeing things, hearing things, awake for 7 days at a stretch. It happened last year. I was there. I was also the longest-serving employee. Most people lasted 3 to 4 months at best. I was there for 11 years, so my boss gave me a call and said that all the time I was having off, human resources was firing me in the next 3 days. So I quit first and kept my unused holiday. Story 18. I was working at a nonprofit in Washington, D.C. They courted me from another position, promising a $20,000 raise, better hours, more responsibility, and more autonomy to make needed changes. Within a month, I knew it was a mistake. I stuck it out because my manager was a friend and clearly needed help. The salary was as promised, which was nice, but the hours were insane, usually more than 50 hours per week, and the autonomy wasn't there. The team I was supposed to manage was told I wasn't managing anyone. I was just another member of the team. The changes I suggested during interviews, which the interviewers were excited about, were shot down by team members. Training was non-existent, and I was met with constant pushback on everything. When I didn't know how they did things or how systems worked, I was given bare-bones explanations and expected to figure it out. When I didn't figure it out perfectly, my teammates would complain to my manager, who was a friend. My manager would call me 3 to 4 nights a week after 8 o'clock or 9 p.m., crying about the environment and saying things like, "Forget everyone, just do your job. These people are difficult." It was horrible. After a few months, my wife became pregnant. The stress mounted and life got crazy. To compensate for the lack of oversight, I was allowed to hire and manage interns, which was a massive step down from my previous role. I presented a candidate to bring on and was overruled by my teammates. The person we brought on was awful, consistently late with no explanations, didn't complete projects on time, if at all, wasn't receptive to feedback, etc. My teammates quickly gave up on them and just stopped giving them tasks. I kept giving tasks, providing feedback, giving support, etc. After 3 months of a 4-month internship, I was called into our chief operating officer's office and told that I had a management complaint levied against me. The complaint essentially said I was riding the intern too hard, was rude or curt, and was setting unrealistic expectations. I asked for specifics and none were provided. I turned over dozens of emails and chat messages showing how I consistently communicated, gave constructive feedback, provided extra time off when asked, and checked in on status, offering to review ahead of a deadline or answer questions. Basically, all of my evidence completely rebuked the complaint. The complaint was dismissed by the chief operating officer and human resources, who said it was a bad intern trying to blame their poor work performance on someone else. The only additional feedback was, try to be a little nicer in your messages. You're a little direct, and a lot of our staff don't do well with being direct. Following this exchange, my duties were expanded, and my teammates now reported to me officially. I softened. I hated my job but trudged through for 7 months. My son was born 6 weeks early, and I started paternity leave. After 2 weeks, I was asked when I was coming back and if I could move up the date because the team was struggling without me. It was implied that it was my fault that my son came early, leaving the team unexpectedly in a lurch. I was nice and came back early. While I was out, my manager hired a mid-level staffer who was meant to be my first hire. My paternity leave interrupted the process, apparently. The person who was hired was massively unqualified. My manager liked their attitude and acknowledged they'd need help. After a month of training, things were worse than I thought. We got to the point where I had to review every email that was sent, as he was unable to write an email that wasn't riddled with typos and misinformation. I was kind. I took the time to edit, explain the edits, and tell him how much he was improving. I took him to lunches, telling him how much we appreciated his work and how well he was doing. This went on for 8 months of doing 2 jobs. I had just started looking for a new job, as this one wasn't sustainable with a newborn at home, let alone for my sanity and work-life balance. One Friday, I was working from home and had a pediatrician's appointment at 1:30. I had planned to take the rest of the afternoon off. It was on my calendar, and the team knew. I was running out the door when I got a message asking for feedback on a 20-page proposal that was supposed to be drafted 2 days ago by close of business. I wrote a quick note, "Hey, no, I can't review this today." I was on my phone and apparently didn't hit send on the second message. I'm heading to a pediatrician appointment and am offline the rest of the day. I can look at it on Monday. If it's urgent, such as our boss is asking for it, text me, and I'll look as soon as I'm back from the pediatrician. The employee went to one of our teammates and said that this was evidence that I was deliberately trying to get him fired. They combed through our exchanges over the past 8 months and went to human resources. The chief executive officer got involved, reviewing all materials, and my annual review now included my manager and the chief executive officer. I knew this wouldn't be good. The chief executive officer said, "Listen, you've done great work here. You've increased revenue, the team is more productive, and the majority of staff say it's great working with you, especially the junior staff. However, you had another complaint filed against you. Clearly, the environment isn't a good fit, so we're going to part ways. This isn't an indictment on your work ethic, simply a bad personality fit." My manager, former friend, piped in saying, "To clarify, we're firing you. You aren't happy, and we're not happy with this complaint." I wanted to be clear and ensure you understood what parting ways meant. The chief executive officer jumped in to say, "I wouldn't put it like that. Your work has been great. I'm happy to serve as a reference for any jobs you're applying for." I had told him I was looking and make any introductions needed. This isn't about your work product. There have just been 2 complaints and we need to act. Even though there's not a lot of substance on either complaint, you understand how people talk. Also, this isn't an immediate separation. We wanted to give you 6 months to look for something new. Take the time to go on interviews, apply for positions, etc. We'll gradually cut back your workload to whatever's needed. We'll also tell staff whatever you want about the separation. If you get a new job, great. If not, we'll handle it however you want. My response was, I couldn't agree more on this being a bad personality fit. I work extremely long hours, travel extensively, which was not part of the original contract, and get late-night calls from my manager, crying and being frantic about goals or people she's conflicting with, on top of the original terms of my employment not being met. I stuck with the position because I believe in the mission, but I've spent too much energy crying from stress and putting on a smiling face for teammates that treat me poorly. I'm currently a final candidate in 5 searches and expect to get offers within the week. I received 3 out of the 5 offers, each with a $30,000 raise. Once something finalizes, I'll provide 2 weeks' notice. In the meantime, I'm happy to go on the currently scheduled trips as needed and support the team. The chief executive officer was taken aback. You're a class act. If you're willing to support these trips, I'd appreciate it. You're demonstrating exactly what I said. It's not personal. In the meantime, just let me know what you need for your search. If you need a few days to process and get sorted, go ahead and tell Human Resources you're working from home. There's no need to take paid time off. We'll pay you out your vacation when you end up leaving. Don't count any job-related stuff as paid time off." We left the room, and my manager called me into her office, asking if I was okay and wanted to talk through anything. I told her we were done. I was tired of her backstabbing and emotional abuse. I can handle being let go, but her actions in the meeting itself were disgusting and in stark contrast to the chief executive officer. I left 3 weeks later with a better job.